Our first class period was the introduction, and I liked how we discussed the definition of happiness, referring to a general sense of overall well-being, not pleasure or short-term concepts. Second class period was positive psychology and the study of happiness. I liked knowing that I have more control over my happiness than like my circumstances or things like that, and actually voluntary variables cover 40% of our overall ability to be happy. Third class period was flourishing. I really learned a lot about my signature strengths and how I can use my spirituality, my prudence, or caution in decision making, and love of learning to create a good life. Fourth class period was achieving authentic happiness, and what stood out to me the most was how beneficial forgiveness is in being happy and how it diffuses bitterness. And we talked about the acronym of REACH. The fifth class period was the how of happiness, and what stood out to me were the happiness myths, or the idea that happiness must be found. Happiness lies in changing our circumstances, and you either have it or you don't, which we know are not true. That's why they're myths. The sixth class period was PERMA, specifically talking about positivity and love, and I love the idea that positivity broadens and opens us up, as well as builds our resources to be able to handle certain situations and become better. The seventh class period was PERMA, also talking about flow, and I learned that flow is a state of being completely involved in activity for the sole purpose of being involved and doing that activity, and you kind of lose loss of consciousness, loss of time, and you're completely involved in the activity. The eighth class period was PERMA, talking about meaning and achievement. I learned about hedonia, which is that pleasure principle, or the absence of bodily and mental pain, and the eudaimonia, which is human flourishing or being and doing good, which I thought was really interesting, which motivates us to achieve and accomplish things. The ninth lesson was the happiest places, and I learned that Denmark is the happiest place in the world. I think they call it hygge, which is like this idea of being comfortable, which was really interesting, and how we should apply that into our lives too. The 10th lesson was why do we do what we do, and I learned that intrinsic motivation is the most powerful type of motivation, and it comes when we have the opportunity to choose what we want to do, which I thought was fascinating. The 11th class period was self-determination theory, and we talked about the basic psychological needs of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. These need to be there when we're, or if we're to be self-determined and motivated by our own free will. The 12th class period was the time famine, and I learned that we overwork ourselves a lot, and that we really need to take time for vacation and to recover from work. The 13th lesson was taking back your time, and what stood out to me was the importance of how I need to change the pace, and how I can do that by keeping a time diary, being still, reading the scriptures, going to the temple, or having realistic expectations. The 14th lesson was building a good life in the digital world. I really loved the 7 philosophers and their ideas about how to balance technology and well-being, particularly Franklin, who talked about positive rituals and how I can apply positive rituals into my life. The 15th lesson was the intentional family. I love the idea of creating family rituals which are significant, repeated, and coordinated, and how you know if something is a ritual when it stands the time of neglect for doing that. The 16th lesson was family rituals, and they talked about how for managing family rituals, the adults need to agree, there need to be clear expectations, minimal conflict, and maximum participation to make it a success. The 17th lesson was about lost child in the woods, and I liked how they talked about the nature deficit disorder and how it describes the human cost of alienation from nature and the negative consequences of not being a part of nature. The 18th class period was the experience economy and staging, and what I really liked in this lesson was talking about the theater modeling, how they described creating an experience as a play, and what components are involved in that theater model, such as the acting, the audience, the performance, and what components of experience economy and staging are involved in that model. The 19th lesson was fostering empathy. I loved how it discussed it's a universal affliction to betray ourselves by going against our sense of what is right and wrong, of moral self-compromising, where we did not do what we knew we probably should, or we did do what we knew we probably shouldn't do. The 20th lesson was creative confidence and design thinking. I like the idea of how we need to think through problems such as we call the wicked problems, which are undefined and tricky, and the gravity problems, which are not solvable, and how design thinkers are able to conquer these problems by being creative. The 21st, or number 21, is designing your life intro and the designer's mindset. Stood out to me the most about being curious and trying things and reframing problems and just creating that mindset. The 22nd lesson was designing your life, wayfinding in the Odyssey plans, and how we can create alternative lives, and we don't know what our passion is until we go out and try things. Prototyping was the 23rd lesson, and that allows you to try and fail without over-investing in a path, and I really liked that, how we can try little things before we really commit to something. And the last one was choosing happiness, and I liked how it was the idea of thinking about what's the next step, as opposed to thinking about what am I going to do with my life.